There comes a moment in history when the lights go out, not because the power has failed, but because the people have turned away from the source of light. Scripture declares, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light." But what happens when a nation rejects that light? A blackout is not always electrical. Sometimes it is spiritual. Sometimes it is moral. Sometimes it is the silence that falls when truth is ignored and warning is dismissed. Throughout history, God has used signs, not to destroy, but to wake up. When ancient civilizations crossed a line, there was always a moment of shaking, a withdrawal, a pause, a darkness that forced a choice, return or continue down the path of collapse. We are told in the Scriptures that God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. So when darkness spreads, it is not because God has changed. It is because we have moved away from Him. Chosen one, this blackout is not random. It is not accidental. It is not without purpose. When the lights go out, distractions fade. Comfort disappears, illusions are exposed, and in the darkness, one question echoes louder than ever. Where is your trust? In Egypt, before deliverance came, there was darkness. Before resurrection, there was the tomb. Before revival, there is always exposure. God allows the shaking so that what is false may fall, and what is eternal may remain. This is not a message of fear. It is a message of urgency, because even in the blackout there is hope. The same God who allows the darkness also declares, "Arise, shine, for your light has come." The chosen are not those who blend into the darkness, but those who carry the light within them. You were not chosen to panic. You were chosen to stand. You were not chosen to curse the darkness. You were chosen to illuminate it. The blackout reveals who depends on systems and who depends on God. It separates faith from comfort, conviction from convenience, truth from compromise. And here is the promise: darkness never has the final word. The blackout is temporary. The awakening is eternal. So return while there is still time. Wake up while the warning still echoes. Stand firm while others fall away. Because when the light returns, it will be clear who was watching, who was ready, and who truly belonged to the light. The blackout being spoken of is not merely about the loss of electricity, technology, or modern convenience. It is a deeper and more serious kind of darkness, one that settles over the heart, the mind, and the soul of a people. When light disappears in this way, it is not because the source of light has failed, but because the connection to it has been abandoned. Spiritual blackout occurs when truth is ignored, when moral clarity is replaced by confusion, and when what was once clearly right and wrong becomes blurred. This kind of darkness cannot be fixed by engineers or restored by power grids, because it exists beyond the physical realm. From the beginning, light has always symbolized God's presence, truth, and order. Darkness, on the other hand, represents separation, deception, and disorder. When a society pushes aside spiritual truth, it does not immediately collapse. Instead, the lights begin to dim gradually. Conviction weakens, reverence fades, and compromise becomes normal. What once shocked the conscience becomes entertainment, and what was once honored becomes mocked. This is how a spiritual blackout begins, quietly, subtly, and often unnoticed until the darkness feels complete. This blackout affects how people think and live. Without spiritual light, decisions are no longer guided by eternal principles, but by emotion, desire, and self-interest. Truth becomes relative, shaped by opinion rather than anchored in something unchanging. In such darkness, people may still appear successful, advanced, and prosperous on the surface, yet inwardly they stumble, searching for meaning and direction. Anxiety increases, confusion spreads, and emptiness grows, even in the midst of abundance. The loss of light creates a hunger that nothing material can satisfy, A spiritual blackout also dulls the ability to recognize warning signs. When light is absent, danger feels normal. Paths that lead to destruction are mistaken for progress. Without illumination, people call darkness light and light darkness, believing they are moving forward while slowly drifting further away from what gives life. This is why the blackout is so dangerous. It removes discernment. People no longer ask whether something is true, righteous, or eternal, but only whether it is popular, comfortable, or beneficial in the moment. Yet this darkness does not come without purpose. A blackout forces stillness. It removes distractions and exposes what has been hidden. When the lights go out, people are compelled to confront reality without filters or illusions. The absence of light reveals dependence, what people truly rely on when everything familiar disappears. In this way, spiritual darkness becomes a mirror, reflecting the condition of the heart and revealing how far it has drifted from its source. Even so, darkness is never meant to be permanent. The presence of a blackout implies that light exists and can return. Spiritual darkness serves as a warning, not a final sentence. It is an invitation to recognize the loss, to acknowledge the separation, and to seek restoration. Light is not created by effort alone. It returns when connection is restored. When people turn back toward truth, humility, and reverence, illumination begins to break through the darkness once more. Most importantly, the blackout reminds us that light is not only external, it is meant to dwell within. Even in widespread darkness, those who carry spiritual light become points of clarity and hope. They see differently, live differently, and guide others simply by walking in truth. While the blackout reveals the absence of light in the world, it also reveals the power of even a single flame. Darkness cannot overcome light. It only highlights its necessity. Darkness has never been the final act in the story of humanity. It has always been a warning that something greater is at stake. When darkness appears on a wide scale, it is not meant to signal immediate destruction, but to serve as a moment of mercy, a pause before consequence. Throughout history, darkness has come as a threshold, a dividing line between continuation and collapse. It confronts people with the reality that the path they are on cannot go on unchanged. In this way, darkness functions not as an end, but as an invitation to awaken before irreversible damage is done. Warnings are rarely loud at first. They often come as discomfort, unease, and subtle disturbances that challenge the conscience. When these signs are ignored, the darkness deepens. What begins as a whisper becomes a shadow, and what begins as a shadow can become overwhelming night. The purpose of this progression is not cruelty, but opportunity. It allows space for reflection, repentance, and realignment before consequences become unavoidable. Darkness, in this sense, is an act of restraint. It slows the fall long enough for a choice to be made. History bears witness to this pattern. Civilizations do not collapse without warning. Moral decay, loss of restraint, and the rejection of truth always precede the fall. Before judgment comes exposure. Before collapse comes confusion. Darkness settles in not as a sudden strike, but as a signal flare, alerting those who are willing to see that something has gone terribly wrong. It reveals cracks in foundations long before buildings crumble. Those who recognize the warning have the opportunity to change course. Those who dismiss it continue forward, unaware of the edge ahead. Darkness also has the power to strip away false security. In times of apparent stability, people trust systems, institutions, and achievements, believing these will always sustain them. But when darkness arrives, those supports prove fragile. What once seemed permanent reveals itself as temporary. This unraveling is not meant to destroy hope, but to redirect it. It exposes misplaced trust and invites people to anchor themselves in something deeper and more enduring than human strength or innovation. Yet warnings are only effective if they are heeded. Darkness does not force change, it demands a response. Some will see it as an inconvenience to be overcome, others as an enemy to be fought, but only a few will recognize it as a call to self-examination. Those who pause in the darkness, who ask hard questions and confront uncomfortable truths, discover that the warning itself contains grace. It is far better to awaken in the night than to fall in the daylight without realizing the danger. Importantly, darkness before judgment reveals that judgment is not God's first desire. If destruction were the goal, there would be no warning. The presence of darkness as a sign means there is still time. Time to return, time to realign, time to rebuild what has been neglected. Darkness announces urgency, not hopelessness. It presses upon the heart the seriousness of the moment, urging action before opportunity fades. The danger lies in becoming comfortable with the darkness. When people adapt to it, they lose the desire for light. What was once alarming becomes familiar, and familiarity dulls urgency. This is why warnings must be recognized quickly. The longer darkness lingers, the easier it is to accept it as normal. When that happens, judgment no longer feels like a shock, it feels like the natural outcome of prolonged neglect. Still, the story does not end in darkness. A warning fulfilled its purpose when it leads to change. When people respond with humility and realignment, darkness begins to lift. What was meant as a signal becomes the turning point. In this way, darkness stands not as a threat, but as a mercy-filled pause, a final call to choose life before the consequences of ignoring the light become permanent. When darkness increases in the world, it is easy to assume that something has happened to God, that he has withdrawn, grown distant, or ceased to care. But this assumption misunderstands the nature of the source of light. Light does not change its nature, it shines consistently. When a room grows dark, it is not because the sun has dimmed, but because walls, distance, or barriers have come between the light and those inside. In the same way, spiritual darkness is not evidence of divine absence, but of human movement away from the source. God's character is unchanging. Truth does not shift with culture, time, or opinion. What was light generations ago remains light today. What was destructive in the past remains destructive now. Yet people often mistake consistency for irrelevance. As values evolve and desires change, eternal truth is treated as outdated rather than foundational. The drift does not happen overnight. It begins with small compromises, adjustments made for convenience, comfort, or acceptance. Over time, those compromises accumulate, creating distance that feels invisible until the separation becomes undeniable. This drifting is rarely intentional rebellion. More often, it is neglect. Priorities shift. Attention is divided. What once held central importance is slowly pushed to the margins. Reverence is replaced with familiarity, and familiarity with indifference. People do not wake up one day having rejected light. They simply stop turning toward it. As alignment weakens, clarity fades. Confusion grows not because truth has vanished, but because it is no longer being sought. When societies drift, they often redefine morality to justify the distance. Instead of asking what is right, they ask what is acceptable. Instead of seeking truth, they seek validation. This creates a world where contradiction thrives, where people long for peace while rejecting the principles that sustain it, and desire meaning while dismissing the source from which meaning flows. The result is internal conflict, advancement without fulfillment, freedom without direction, and knowledge without wisdom. The drift also affects perception. When people move away from light, they become less sensitive to its absence. Darkness feels normal. What once felt wrong becomes routine. What once demanded reflection becomes background noise. In this state, people may still speak of God, but without intimacy or obedience. Words remain, but connection weakens. Ritual replaces relationship, and symbolism replaces substance. The light is acknowledged, but no longer followed. Importantly, this separation is not imposed from above, it is chosen from below. God does not force closeness, he invites it. Distance grows where invitation is ignored. Yet even in drift, the source remains unchanged, patient, consistent, and available. The very awareness of darkness is evidence that light still exists. One cannot recognize shadow without first knowing illumination. The danger lies in blaming God for the consequences of distance. When confusion, unrest, and emptiness appear, people may accuse the light of failing them, rather than recognizing that they have turned away from it. This reversal prevents restoration, because it addresses the symptom instead of the cause. Healing begins not with accusation, but with acknowledgement, with the humility to admit that drifting has occurred. The hope is that drifting can be reversed. Distance does not require dramatic effort to close, it requires direction. Turning back toward the source restores clarity. Even small movements toward truth bring noticeable illumination. Light responds instantly to alignment. It does not demand perfection, only return. The moment direction changes, darkness begins to lose its grip. Ultimately, the message is not one of condemnation, but of responsibility. God has not changed. The light has not dimmed. The invitation has not expired. What has shifted is orientation, and orientation can be corrected. When people turn back toward the source of light, they discover it has been shining all along, waiting, steady, and unchanged. Crisis has a way of uncovering what comfort keeps hidden. When everything functions smoothly, foundations are rarely questioned. Stability creates the illusion of strength, and routine disguises vulnerability. But when disruption arrives, it strips away appearances and exposes what truly holds weight. In moments of shaking, what people trust in is no longer theoretical. It becomes visible, undeniable, and revealing. Crisis does not create character or faith. It reveals where they were already placed. Many build their sense of security on systems that appear reliable. Economies, technology, institutions, routines, and personal achievements. These structures provide order and predictability, and over time they begin to feel permanent. Confidence grows not in what is eternal, but in what seems dependable. Yet these systems, no matter how advanced, are inherently fragile. They rely on human maintenance, agreement, and stability, elements that can shift suddenly and without warning. When crisis interrupts them, the shock comes not only from loss, but from the realization that what was trusted was never meant to bear ultimate weight. When familiar supports fail, anxiety rises because trust has been misplaced. People discover that convenience is not the same as security, and progress is not the same as permanence. The collapse of external structures forces an internal reckoning. Questions emerge that were long avoided. What do I rely on when everything else is uncertain? What gives me peace when control is lost? What remains when comfort disappears? These questions surface not because crisis is cruel, but because it is honest. Crisis also exposes dependence on distraction. In times of abundance, noise fills every moment: entertainment, productivity, constant connection. These distractions numb deeper concerns and postpone reflection. When crisis removes them, silence becomes unavoidable. In that silence, unresolved fears, doubts, and longings rise to the surface. What once could be ignored now demands attention. This exposure can feel uncomfortable, even frightening, but it is also necessary. Healing cannot occur where truth is hidden. Some respond to crisis by clinging tighter to failing structures, attempting to restore what was instead of confronting what is. Others search desperately for new systems to replace the old, hoping for a quicker fix. But crisis is not always meant to be solved immediately. Sometimes it is meant to be endured long enough to change perspective. It invites people to shift their trust from what is visible and temporary to what is unseen and enduring. Those whose trust is rooted in something deeper experience crisis differently. While they may still feel pain, loss, and uncertainty, they are not undone by them. Their stability does not depend on circumstances remaining favorable. They recognize that systems can fail without their purpose failing, that loss can occur without meaning disappearing. Their peace is not tied to control, but to confidence in something beyond it. Crisis also has a refining effect. It separates what is essential from what is excessive. Priorities are reordered. What once seemed urgent is revealed as trivial, and what once seemed secondary becomes central. Relationships, values, and convictions are tested and clarified. This refinement is not about punishment, but about alignment, bringing life back into proper focus. In revealing true foundations, crisis offers a rare opportunity. It allows people to rebuild intentionally rather than automatically, to choose trust rather than habit, to anchor life not in what can be shaken, but in what remains steady through every storm. While crisis may feel like loss, it often marks the beginning of deeper strength. What is exposed can be restored, but only if it is acknowledged, and what is rebuilt on a firm foundation emerges stronger than before. Being chosen is often misunderstood as a mark of privilege, status, or exemption from difficulty. But being chosen has never meant being spared from darkness. It has meant being entrusted with responsibility within it. Those who are chosen are not selected to escape the night, but to carry light through it. The calling is not to blend in, remain silent, or wait for conditions to improve, but to stand firm when clarity is scarce and courage is costly. Light is most visible where darkness is deepest. In times of confusion, compromise, and fear, the presence of light becomes unmistakable, not because it is loud, but because it is different. Those who carry light think differently, speak differently, and respond differently. They are not governed by panic or driven by the shifting moods of the moment. Their steadiness itself becomes a testimony. Without preaching or posturing, their lives quietly declare that darkness is not absolute and despair is not final. Carrying light does not mean perfection. It does not mean having all the answers or never experiencing doubt. It means choosing truth when lies are easier, choosing integrity when compromise is rewarded, and choosing hope when cynicism feels justified. Light bearers are often aware of the darkness more than anyone else, but they refuse to let it define their direction. They see clearly without becoming consumed, and they remain grounded without becoming hardened. This calling requires separation, not in distance, but in allegiance. Those who carry light cannot rely on the same sources of guidance as those who walk in darkness. Their values are not shaped by popularity, and their identity is not determined by approval. They are guided by conviction rather than consensus. This often leads to misunderstanding, resistance, and even isolation. Light exposes what darkness prefers to hide, and that exposure is rarely welcomed. Yet the purpose of light is not condemnation, it is revelation. Light does not exist to shame darkness, but to overcome it. Those who carry light are not sent to attack, but to illuminate, to show another way, a truer path, a higher standard. Their presence alone challenges the assumption that darkness is normal or inevitable. They remind others, often without words, that something better exists. Being chosen also means being prepared. Light must be tended, protected, and sustained. It cannot be carried casually. Those entrusted with it must remain connected to its source, because borrowed light fades quickly. When connection weakens, the light dims, and the carrier becomes vulnerable to the same darkness they were meant to confront. This is why humility, discipline, and continual realignment are essential. Light is maintained through dependence, not self-sufficiency. In times of widespread darkness, the temptation is either to retreat in fear or to assimilate for comfort. The chosen are called to do neither. They are called to remain visible, faithful, and steady, not dramatic, not aggressive, but consistent. A single light held steadily can guide many who are lost. A life lived in truth can speak louder than arguments. Endurance becomes influence. Darkness often tests resolve by offering shortcuts, ways to dim the light in exchange for acceptance or ease, but every compromise reduces brightness. Every silence where truth is required allows shadows to grow. Carrying light demands courage because it involves cost, but it also carries promise. Light does not need permission to shine. It fulfills its purpose simply by existing. Ultimately, the chosen are not defined by how loudly they speak about the darkness, but by how faithfully they carry the light. When the night lifts, it becomes clear who was merely reacting and who was standing watch. Those who carry light may not always be celebrated in the moment, but they shape the outcome. Because darkness never defeats light, it only reveals how necessary it is. Darkness often feels overwhelming when it arrives, as though it will stretch on without end. In the moment, it can distort perception, making temporary conditions feel permanent and present struggle feel final. Yet history and experience consistently reveal that darkness is a season, not a destination. It has a beginning, a purpose, and an end. What feels consuming now is not meant to define the future, because darkness does not possess the power of permanence. Awakening, on the other hand, reshapes everything it touches and leaves lasting transformation behind. Darkness serves a function by highlighting absence. It reveals what has been neglected, ignored, or taken for granted. Without light, people become acutely aware of their dependence on it. This awareness is the first step toward awakening. Awakening begins not with comfort, but with recognition, the realization that something vital is missing and cannot be replaced by substitutes. This realization is uncomfortable, but it is also essential because it breaks denial and restores clarity. Awakening is not a sudden emotional experience for most. It is a gradual realignment of vision, values, and direction. It begins internally before it ever manifests outwardly. Minds shift, priorities change, and convictions deepen. What once seemed important loses its grip, and what once seemed distant becomes central. This process outlasts the darkness that triggered it. Even when circumstances improve, the internal change remains, guiding decisions long after the crisis has passed. While darkness can spread quickly, awakening grows deeply. Darkness affects behavior temporarily, often driven by fear or confusion. Awakening reshapes identity. It alters how people see themselves, others, and the world. It produces discernment where there was confusion, purpose where there was aimlessness, and hope where there was despair. These changes do not fade when conditions improve. They become part of the foundation upon which future choices are built. Another reason awakening is eternal compared to darkness is that awakening reconnects people to truth. Truth does not expire or diminish with time. Once it is recognized, it continues to illuminate every area of life. Darkness may return in different forms, but its power is weakened because awareness has been gained. Awakening equips people with resilience. They are no longer easily shaken by uncertainty because they have learned where to anchor their trust. Darkness isolates, but awakening unites. In times of darkness, fear drives people inward, separating them from one another. Awakening reverses this effect. It restores connection, shared purpose, and collective responsibility. People who awaken recognize that they are not meant to endure or overcome alone. This unity becomes a sustaining force that continues long after the darkness fades, strengthening communities and shaping cultures. Importantly, awakening carries forward memory. Those who awaken do not forget the darkness. They learn from it. Memory guards against repetition. It creates vigilance and humility, reminding people of what happens when light is neglected. This remembrance becomes a safeguard, preserving the lessons learned and passing them on to others. In this way, awakening influences generations, while darkness remains confined to a moment. Though darkness feels powerful, it is limited by nature. It can only exist in the absence of light. Awakening, however, generates light from within. Once ignited, it spreads, multiplies, and endures. It does not depend on external conditions to survive. Even in future challenges, those who have awakened carry within them the clarity needed to navigate uncertainty. In the end, darkness passes because it must. Awakening remains because it transforms. What is temporary cannot overpower what is eternal. The night gives way to morning, but those who awaken do not return to sleep. They move forward changed, carrying insight, purpose, and light that continues to shape their lives long after the darkness is gone.